Okay, we will call this meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee to order. It's 12:15. Introductions, please.
Christopher Constant.
Mark Littlefield.
Karen Bronga.
Scott Meyer.
Anna Brawley.
Meg Salatel. Mr. Martinez?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Rivera?
Present.
Okay, any other members on the phone? All right, with that, we will jump right in. We have two unfinished business items, which I don't believe we have specific updates. Okay, a really short one for Mr. Thurn. Take them as you'd like, FEMA or ARPA grant distribution.
I'll speak to FEMA and maybe Ona can maybe help with that particular one, but I have seen if it's not in on base, it's very close to being in on base for the 2018 earthquake assembly authorization to give a little over $10 million more dollars to the 231-801 fund to pay for expenses that we've already incurred, expenses that we're going back and getting new obligations for. As Mr. Littlefield is an expert in that, should you ever have any questions on what that process is, as well as some of the to pay for expenses that are still incurred and coming up in the future. I would ask for your support. This is a big deal. And I think we've hopefully created this whole thing that we've forecasted what we need for the future, what we currently need. I don't anticipate that we will have to come back in the future and ask for any additional one, but it is slightly more than $10 million. And I don't know if Ona knows where that memo is, but it was in the final stages I've seen. And OMB has been very helpful in creating that document. So please be on the lookout for it. Please support it. And we've been talking about it for many, many months. And the reason why there's just as a reminder, it's split between an 8 and a 2.1 million. The 2.1 is that Chugiak Eagle River Fire Station 11, and it has to be a capital project. So we've talked to you about that need. So we've actually just broken it into two because we've already created the capital asset and we're going to move that money into there or budget into there rather than put it in 801 and then having to move it later. So the combined is a little over 10. It's in two line items. Please support it. It's on, and I'm hoping that this will be the last additional amount. And namely, this is because if you remember, where there was a lot of snow on the ground and they came through and quick estimates of projects, and over time the projects had to be rescoped and expenses have now gone up and our costs have gone up. So the initial authorizations were just not enough to cover the actual expenditures in the projects.
Thank you, Mr. Thurn. All right. ARPA grant distribution funding update, anything in the moment?
I'll just give a quick update on that. We are getting prepared for the October third quarter reporting. I think we're in pretty good shape on that. The administration is doing a fabulous job of in contact with and use with our contractor to discuss with any subrecipients. Are they not going to be finished spending their money at the end of this year? They still have 2 more years, but most of the grants were through this year. So we're looking at a couple of them maybe going longer, and we're getting new grant agreements to extend them. They tend to be on some subrecipients that have capital, so it's taken a little longer to finish those particular ones. But I think we're in pretty good shape on that. And I still don't believe, but I'm sure the administration is working towards that $800,000 that was returned from Providence that still has not been completely dealt with, but certainly on our radar. We know everyone's aware of it, and we're moving forward on that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Thurn. Okay, we'll move on to the update from the Budget Advisory Commission. Mr. Harvey, are you here? Or are you on the phone? Okay. If he comes, we'll try to pivot. So we'll go back to Mr. Thurn. You are in the spotlight today. Trust Fund Board update.
Mr. Slivka has informed me he will not be here today, but he wanted to pass on that pretty much everything is status quo. No significant things to report today. We haven't met as a trust since the last Budget and Finance Committee meeting. So everything is on track. Investments are doing very well because the market is doing well. So I know the asset value is continuing, and I know we'll be on schedule to give the last half of the disbursement prior to December 15th in accordance with our guidelines.
Great. A note for the record, Mr. Schultz is online, and Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, just briefly. So when we put this on the agenda last year after the trust fund board was created, there was discussion about how frequently they need to give updates. So we put this in here to make sure that they're there. But I guess I just want to ask and maybe bring it back to Mr. Slivka and the board, like what schedule of updates they want to give? Does it make more sense? Because I don't want to have him come here for no reason, right? And spend time and just in the interest of efficiency. So that's an ask. We're happy to hear from them monthly, but if they meet quarterly and or there's periods where they want to come and give more of an annual report, I just want to put that out there, something to think about, and something hopefully we can decide before next month. Again, just because I don't want to make people drive here for 5 minutes and then it could have been an email, right? So
Understood. I think the two comments with that. One, they can do just like they did. They can inform me and I'll be here and be more than happy to pass that along so they don't have to do that. I do think that there still are items that happen maybe on a quarterly basis where annual, I think, is not enough on this particular fund. Maybe a couple years from now when the fund is all fully fleshed out and all the policies and procedures are in place that are good, there are potential code changes in the future that they want to push through. I think this is a great avenue to be able to come to you in advance of that and say, one, here's what the administration is doing and whether we support it or not, ask those types of questions. Maybe, and I've heard this, I don't know if this has been implemented, but you might be revising the kind of format and schedule of this particular meeting going forward. Maybe if there's a placeholder for an item of just similar to the unfinished business we just talked about, if there's a topic, come in. If not, we're just going to bypass it and move on. That might be a good place to move the trust into that particular category, and then they'll be here when they have something to say. And if not, they know it's not a mandatory thing.
thanks. Yeah, and I'll just say, like, you guys are welcome. I guess just advise us what would be helpful. Not trying to keep those folks off the agenda, but again, just wanting to not make work for the sake of work. Thanks.
Great. If you can hear and you're on the phone and can mute, that would be great. Hey, all right. Thank you. All right. We will continue. Update on the budget. I'll just leave it broad and you can take us where you'd like, Ms. Bross.
Thank you, Chair Zalatel. Let's start with the budget to actuals summary. We can begin with the direct cost page that shows the total spend. Right now, we're 66% through the year, and you'll see at the bottom of the column that the spend is at 59%. There are a couple of departments that are running a little bit hot due to contractual timelines and some rolling leave cash out and personnel changes because of the administration swap. But for the most part, we are under budget.
Yep, they're digesting spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Do you anticipate kind of as what with this administration coming in and getting ramped up to likely maintain an under budget position, or do you think there'll be some catch up as we roll towards the end of the year?
I think that there will be a little bit of both. I believe that we will remain under budget, but I know that we are working with departments to determine what their spend is, whether it's appropriately allocated, if there are any changes that need to be made before we get to year end. We're also looking towards any potentially lapsing funds that should be reappropriated for costs in 2024. So we have a pretty good historical look back over the last couple of years of recurring lapsing funds, and we will likely be bringing some of those questions to the Assembly later this year.
Thanks. And this will just be a general question for follow-up for the administration, not necessarily for OMB, but right, Public Works continues to be a giant zero because we don't have a Public Works director, and we'll want to know if there's any intention of filling that position. Any other questions on budget actuals, Ms. Brawley?
Yeah, so I remember from last month, we were briefed on, and it makes sense that we may be under budget for various reasons, but also that basically any unspent funds will get swept into fund balance and it will go against what we have as still a negative position, or I should say not negative position in fund balance, but we're under where we're supposed to be. So I guess I just wonder like how, at this point, is the administration thinking that money that is not spent by the end of the year is fair game to reuse essentially? Or is it more that even though we are underspent because of these other structural factors that we shouldn't look at that as being, oh, there's going to be extra money available?
Right now, we are looking through any potential lapsing funds to spend specifically in 2024 because we do have costs that need to be covered. There are conversations that this body and the administration have been having about shelter costs and other year-end costs related to snow. That will be part of the package to consider bringing that back. The amount was budgeted. The revenue collections look solid. We may have to make some adjustments, but that will be part of the conversation before we get to the end of the year.
So basically a use it or lose it posture.
Yeah.
Mr. Constant.
Thanks. Do you know why the health department is running so hot on overtime?
Through the chair to Member Constant, off the top of my head, I do not know, but we can
Finance,
find
I
out.
understand. Equal Rights Commission, I'm a little concerned about that, but it's a small amount. Health department is the one that kind of stands out. Thanks.
Great. All right, so budget to actuals. Next
Percent.
is the alcohol tax budget to alcohol, or sorry, alcohol tax budget to actuals report.
Budget to alcohol. Uh, Through the chair to the body, the good news about the budget to actuals on the alcohol tax is that a lot of it is spent. So the sort of delay in spend over the last few years has accumulated in this budget year, but being able to move the grants and funding out the door has been successful so far for a lot of these projects. Many of them are at 100% because they have been transferred over to the recipients. Some of them are still rolling through their cost accrual throughout the year. Some of these will increase maybe more significantly in the fourth quarter because departments will be shifting labor costs into the budget that's available. But for the most part, it looks pretty good as far as clearing out what needed to be in 2024.
Thank you. I have a quick question, Mr. Constant, and you may not have an answer for this, but it will definitely come up when we discuss the budget. Is there some opportunity to look at how rollover funds will work with the alcohol tax, especially any grantees that are receiving money at least after half year, so that they have really, if it's really considered a 12-month appropriation, that there's the full 12 months to spend it. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thanks. So the ARPA process taught us a lot about grants, and we have now this kind of permanent structure for grants to community. Are we implementing a accountability system for these? And if not, or where are we in the implementation of an accountability system for the grantees to make sure that we don't make any mistakes? We aren't overburdensome, but we aren't not looking.
Through the chair to Member Constant, we are looking at that accountability program, particularly for grants as we increase grant acquisition over time. I believe full implementation of something like that is something that will occur after the budget is proposed and approved. We're in conversations with various departments to figure out what grant protocols they have in place and how both OMB and other internal service departments can support their current operations, but how we would like to change them going forward into the future. So there is a more robust support system, and some of the challenges that we have seen from departmental capacity and grant management is no longer an issue.
That's good news. And I know some grants or departments processes are pretty onerous and some are pretty light. And so figuring out a systematic way to make it better is good. And also my experience writing grants for the muni or to the muni, it's been years and years, but we stopped because it was so burdensome. And so we don't want to get there, but we definitely want to make sure grantees are doing what they say they were going to do. Thanks.
Thanks. Yeah, I would like to see the grantees reports find some light Because I know that most of these grants require metrics and reporting on a very regular basis. So how do we get those reports to the assembly to see how they're going? And maybe we just do a grant review palooza every now and then and take a look at those reports. Ms. Brawley.
Yeah, some other stuff to add to that conversation. So the Budget Advisory Commission, one of the members had asked about, has there been any audits done of those grants? And so I started an email chain with Mr. Lee, just asking about that. And there was interest, I think, in adding that, but knowing, of course, there's an annual, and I know Felix would remind me of this, there's an annual process for deciding what goes in there. So I did request that that be considered as the annual audit process for the alcohol tax grants. And then the other thing to point to is the alcohol tax strategic plan has a lot of recommendations that that most of which were came out of the process, but need to be handed to the administration to implement. So just to look at that as well. And I also echo the comments about making it less onerous, because that was one of the biggest issues. My other question unrelated to that is, and I know picking up something Ms. Eldell has already said, a lot of these lines in the budget say things like program operations, and I know they're attached to positions. And I know it's like an earlier version of the alcohol tax budget from probably 21 did have all those things itemized, and then they were rolled together. So just to flag that again, because for example, I see health program operations under the child abuse bucket, and then I also see it under the homelessness bucket. So just if we can do that better in the future, I think that'd be helpful. And then I do actually have one other question, because I noticed there are some grants that are fully encumbered, basically. So even if they're not fully spent, they say 100%. And then other ones that are even to the same organization in some cases are not fully encumbered. So I just wonder if you have any visibility on that. Again, thinking about making sure that folks are spending down what was appropriated.
Through the chair to Member Brawley, which ones are you looking at specifically? If you can identify them for me, I'd be able to.
Yeah, so just as an example, looking under the homelessness bucket, and we don't have to get into the specific
Sure.
grants, but I'm looking at some of the Catholic Social Services money says 100%, even though it's not fully spent, it's fully encumbered. And then a few other ones, like I think I'm trying to read across the line. Brother Francis looks like it's not fully encumbered, and then a few others. So just kind of flagging that, I guess, making sure that, I don't know the difference, but making sure that they all get the money.
And to answer your question and the comment from Chair Zalatel, I will say that I met with Claire Ross about a month ago, I think, and we had conversations about the sort of visual changes to the alcohol tax layout and what kinds of information would be better included. I think that that detail will be part of the budget process, so you'll see that change there. And as far as rollover funds and continuing grant availability to people who receive in mid-year, that's part of the protocol that you have been doing over the last couple of years, and I believe that will continue.
Great. I think that rolls us right into FY25 budget prep.
FY25 budget prep. We're working on the budget. We spend a lot of time every single day building the budget. There's lots of tiny pieces of information that have to go into the accurate outcome for the mayor's proposed budget. There are a lot of moving pieces as part of the cleanup from the last few years, but it's going well so far. We still intend to bring you a budget by October 2nd, and I've had meetings with a handful of members so far. I'd welcome more conversations if there are specific projects or appropriations that you want to get a sort of lead on before the proposed budget comes out outside of the amendment process. But right now, I think the membership will be pleased with some of the changes that we'll show for the capital process and some of the visibility changes into the budget for 2025.
Thanks. I will offer up as well, our budget analyst meets with the director of OMB weekly. So he's another conduit if you have an idea you want to flag and you don't have time to coordinate your schedule with OMB. All right, we're going to keep on going. Financial status, Mr. Thurn.
You have the pleasure of listening to me muddle my way through this. The treasurer is on vacation today, so I'll be leading this. Before I get too far, I just want to show in the audience, we now have a deputy treasurer, Lauren Crawford, if he might just wave his hand right there. A little over a year in an unfilled position, so really pleased to have him here. Perfect timing with all the analysis on sales tax and all of our revenue projections. So you may see him around in Glenn's absence moving forward. We are approximately 70% through the year, so that's kind of the bellwether on some of these items when we're looking at them. We'll start with just some of the items that I think are important. The 24 garnishment, the PFD was just announced today at 1,702. So it's more than the 1,650 here. That's where the vast majority of the remaining of that money will come. So I think we're in decent shape on that as we go forward here. You can see on real property tax, we're 99.4% of what we expected was able to arrive as we go through there. I'm on page 2 here, bring your attention, we talk about the cash pool. If you're aware, the Fed dropped the rate yesterday 0.5%, which is good for our investments. So while we're sitting with a negative $2 million position as we're speaking, and as we're talking about right now, that's just a fictitious accounting thing to show you where our investments are at this particular point. I would fully expect once this rate change takes effect and gets calculated, that negative number is going to go positive next month. It's just an accounting thing and how we do that. But that also means we don't have to make that money up. It's showing a negative right now. But I would also anticipate that number is going to get even better as the year goes on, because I would imagine after the election, there'll be 1 or 2 more rate drops at that particular point in time. Going to page 3 on the quarterly reporting, that's only showing about half there. That's because we report those revenues on a quarterly basis. So in October, hopefully we will have the July, August, September numbers reflecting in here. But you can also see if that's 50% of the time, if that was half the year, you can see we're in pretty good shape. Overall, my conversation with the treasurer yesterday, he is really excited about how all the numbers are actually starting to come together. Our budget for this year is really starting to come into what the projections are in a variety of these columns. So he's pretty confident that we're going to look at the end of the year as consistent as we have been historically. And going to a lot of the taxes on page 4, you can see we're actually running positive on some of these, and given we're only 70% through the year, but we're in the ballpark on pretty much all of them, or we're exceeding it, which is good at this particular point in time. And then I did want to, as I always do, well, as I mentioned earlier, the trust will give its other 8.15 million in probably first part of December, so that will always come in at 100%. Building safety. Thanks to the assembly, specifically Ms. Zalatel and even Ona at that point in time, you will see we're actually over our budget on there. And I keep going back to the 2 factors that are probably driven to that. One, we may have had a good construction year and our permit and fees have come in, of which I know nothing about. However, you did increase the mill rate, and the mill rate is done through taxes, which we've collected in June and August. So that money should have been gone back to that extra 0.45 mill rate, I think it was. But we're getting a small benefit of that. Then your support of that and your effort is bringing us in. Now, this is not erasing our $13 million deficit. It's hopefully not causing it to grow this year. So as that number goes up above what we budgeted, I'm hoping that is mitigating our historical annual losses that we have. But I am very pleased to see that, and thank you for your efforts in doing the first quarter budget revisions to make that happen. But we're finally actually seeing that benefit to that fund. So I wanted to bring that to your attention, and I'm hoping that it will go higher in the future.
Okay, a couple of questions, Mr. Constant.
Yep, thank you. So on the garnishments, first, I have 2 questions. Energy rebates, is that also garnished? So the way that they structured this year, it's 2 parts. It's 1,300 and change as the PFD, and then the difference is about $300 worth of an energy rebate, non-taxable federal. And so that might have an impact on the number that we get. Ona has her finger up.
Through the chair to member Constant, if I recall, the last time that happened, when the energy rebates were given, they were not part of the garnishment program.
Right, and so that number may be off
That,
now.
that could have an impact of that. And the Treasury Department's here, so we'll look into that. How long after the money do we get the garnishments immediately upon the issuance of the checks, or does it take a week or two after that? So maybe by the next report in the middle of next month, we'll have that. But if, as usual, there's probably more garnishments than we can take. So we'll take as much as we can based upon the applicable state law and what the amounts are.
I just think that that number is gonna have to be edited down because there's a $300 difference per that they, at least it was published today that they're doing it in two parts.
Okay.
So that number may not be.
We'll take that into consideration and see where that goes.
And then for the BSSA, two questions there. One is, should we increase another fractional percentage this year to accelerate the recovery? That's kind of a philosophical question to the body and to the administration to think about. And the second part is, you know, I still maintain some substantial concerns that the planning department, the permitting desk funded by these dollars, and yet anyone from outside of the BSSA can come in and use those staff to do their projects and not pay for it. And so once again, we have a scenario where folks in the BSSA are actually paying for the freebie services for parts outside. And so I have some concerns that when you look at the repayment process and how we're getting back to zero, how is that being repaid? Who is repaying? Is it cost causer, cost payer? Because if that's the case, then we need to be a little more effective at how we do our outreach. And so, or collections, if you will. If you don't want to be in the BSSA, that's fine, but you can't have the free services paid for by those in the BSSA if you are not interested. So we have to figure that out.
Heard, some of us are figuring it out.
Okay.
I'm not a part of the budget process. I'm sure Ona is and is taking all these things in consideration, but from the CFO's hat, anything you can do anywhere to help reduce that negative impact on the fund balance will help us in many different ways. So if there's opportunities for that, that support would be great in a variety of different fashions.
Thank you.
Ms. Brawley.
Thanks. Yeah, also on the BSSA, I'll just share that we've been discussing that. And I think because it has to do with setting the mill levy, I think we'll probably have an initial conversation about it. And we've talked with OMB about this in November, but then really that'll be a discussion for first quarter when we actually know kind of what we can do. And then at least for my part, I see a direct connection between our housing policy goals and what we do with that, because I think the other consideration is cost causer, cost payer only works if you have enough development happening. And that it was built in an environment where there's, in theory, was enough development that would pay for itself. We aren't there right now. And I think there's a valid argument to say, fee relief or reducing the cost, which includes time cost and fee cost on development, is a strategy that most other cities have been using to spur housing development. So I think, but all of those things are heard because not everybody is in the service area. And so I'm interested in shifting that so that we don't have an incentive to keep charging fees for things that is directly getting in the way of our other goals. So I'll say that. And I do have a question as well on the format. I think it'd be helpful for this revenue document. And I know it's complicated, but what things are under the cap and what are outside the cap? I think grouping them would be helpful. And I know some of them are split, like bed tax. So just being clear, maybe, and for example, moving marijuana tax to be next to alcohol tax going forward. I think that would be helpful because folks don't have visibility on where these sit, and it does matter. But then my question specifically is on SEMT. Going back to the move to fund mobile crisis team using those funds, I see it's only 5% right now, and I know it takes a while to get the money. I just wonder if there's a more specific update on when we'll see that, or if there's any concern that we won't get it, or that there's some kind of significant delay. Thanks.
Through the Member Brawley, I am probably confident in saying, even though I haven't looked into that's because we have not received the funds for SEMT this year related to our late ACFR that we got out. My last conversation with Chief Shoggy was that the state had everything. They were going through that process. It probably would behoove the administration and anybody who has any input to ask the state to please, please, please process that payment prior to December 31st, because I know according to statute, they could actually hit us in the first quarter for that, which doesn't help us this year. The money will come, but I believe that is the direct relationship that approximately 18 to $20 million we have not received that from the state yet. And we are entering the last quarter of this year. So it probably would behoove us to contact the state and follow up on where they might be in that process to try to get that money.
Great, thank you. Probably be good to have that information as we take up the fire department's budget next month when we go through our work session. All right, with that, I'm going to hand the gavel over to Ms. Brawley because I get the pleasure of going upstairs for AMATs. So Ms. Brawley, take it away.
Alrighty, thanks everyone. Are there other questions on where we are right now? Ms. Branca?
This is not on the page you were just going through, but I was on this spreadsheet that Ona was doing. And when we're in the homelessness, and there's not page numbers on here, but it's the second to last page. It says modular units as transitional shelters, 500,000. And it looks like it's been spent. I don't know where those transitional shelters are. I don't think it's the Central Lutheran because they were fundraising for them, so.
Through the chair to member Branca, I do not know where those transitional units are either off the top of my head, but we can find out what that has gone to. I would imagine it's acquisition. I don't know that they would have put them out already, but I can look into what the terms of that agreement are.
Yeah, I actually think that it's not that far along. I think that it's gotten to the point of encumbrance under a grant program. And so
Right.
they put out the solicitation was received, and I think that they've done whatever they're doing, they're processing it. But wouldn't it reflect as spent once encumbered? Right? Isn't that effectively it? And so once the grant program is established and they put the RFP, that money's encumbered.
And you'll see in the page, it's in pre-encumbrance stage, so they're already working through that process.
Right, and so effectively there aren't units built. The money is dedicated to that process and it's going through the machinations to get it out. And Central Lutheran did have an application under that program, at least in my memory that they did, but it hasn't gotten to the point of award yet. And so that is my understanding of where that stands at this time.
And that would jive with the idea that it's in pre-encumbrance phase, which means it hasn't gone out the door. So they
So I guess my
are still.
statement is not encumbered per se, but it's appropriated to, and it's effectively encumbered. I mean, it just hasn't, the signatures aren't there yet.
I'm just hoping that the 10 tiny little homes at Central Lutheran aren't 500,000. That's freaking me out.
Yeah, no, this was a broader pool of money and they were just one applicant under it. But I don't know if there were other applicants. This is probably a conversation for the health committee and the public safety committee to get a briefing from the health department to come in and kind of give an update on the status of that. They might be a little cagey if they haven't got final documents signed with the various entities, but they'll give us a good briefing.
Go ahead, Ms. Branca.
So earlier you said, I think I heard, why does the health department have so much overtime? And I'm not seeing an overtime column, at least I'm maybe missing it.
There's a whole page on overtime.
Oh, there's a whole overtime page.
Yeah,
Okay,
it's the third page.
gotcha. Thank you.
And I'll suggest also, actually, meeting I had earlier today upstairs was really asking for a total spend on emergency cold weather shelter for last winter and just really an accounting of where we are and kind of having a sense of like what it cost last year. And I think going alongside that is these other pieces, really following up on what's already happened and understanding where it went. So yeah, I think that's really not the purview of this committee, but I think, or it is in the sense that it's budget, but it's really better in a different committee, I think. But that's something that we would like to see that I think will really help inform our conversations this fall. Okay, any other questions, comments? Okay, So then let's move on to other business, which you will see is both item E and number 5. And it meant to be the same thing. There's some things that we have been talking about in this committee that and intend to keep talking about in this committee. So just wanting to get an update on these things. And then what our ask to OMB is not just an update now, but if you can give us a preview of when you would like to take this up in more detail. And I know that differs by item. So let's start with ML&P closeout.
Thank you, Chair Brawley. So we had been tracking the activity of Budget and Finance Committee, obviously, in the OMB, and the document that had come forward about the concerns around the deadlines associated with the sale of ML&P and also the stipulation for the Alaska Center for Treatment, which is currently in the Golden Lion and has been as part of the discussion over the last few years. So we took the document that this body has used and answered the questions that were part of the discussion points. So part of this is the Budget and Finance Committee document, and then the answers are provided by OMB. So if you'd like, we can just walk through the 5 questions relatively quickly. And if there are any questions that members have, please let me know. The first consideration was the Alaska Center for Treatment requirement to spend $15 million on capital expenditures. The RCA stipulations for the 2020 sale of ML&P included an agreement requiring the MOA to provide $15 million in funding within 5 years of the date of closing for planning, construction, design, and related demolition costs for a substance use disorder treatment center. This screenshot is from the RCA stipulations and includes the narrative portion of what the Alaska Center for Treatment or the to be named treatment center would be and how it would benefit the community. You'll notice on line 11 of that screenshot, it says, subject to Anchorage Municipal Assembly appropriation, MOA shall spend $15 million toward the planning, et cetera, et cetera. If you turn to page 2, there is a revision section that is carried in the Eklutna Power Purchase Agreement, which was part of the sale of ML&P. And this is specific to the expenditures and costs around the Alaska Center for Treatment agreement. You'll notice in section C, it says, if the seller has not, on or before the 5th anniversary of the closing, received an appropriation of funds from the assembly or seller in the amount of $15 million for the purposes of planning, permitting, et cetera. The good note is you've already done that.
The 15?
The 15 million was appropriated originally into a capital set-aside fund for the acquisition and capital costs associated with an Alaska Center for Treatment. The expense that was put forward on buying the Golden Lion was about, I think, $10.5 million. And the remaining funding is still in that capital set-aside fund. The intention right now is for maintenance and operations to continue to use that funding to make capital improvements to the building so that it is operational and can be used and continue to be used as a potential center for treatment for substance disorder.
Mr. Constant?
So the assembly of seller, what does that mean?
The seller is the municipality of Anchorage. The assembly is of the seller.
Weird. Okay, and so I think what I'm taking away from this conversation, and I'll read through this more carefully later, is that for the purposes of the consent decree, the October deadline is not an important deadline as it had been considered before, because the effective action has been completed, but notwithstanding the fact that it still has to be at some point in the future operationalized to the $15 million. Otherwise, we would do the $15 million at some future time.
Through the chair to Member Constant, the concern that we came into in the transition process was that the Alaska Center for Treatment, the Golden Lion building, had to be operational by the 2025 deadline. It does not. The funds have to be set aside and intended for use, ideally under a contract for the capital costs, acquisition, rehabilitation associated with the building itself. And part of the concern was that in order to meet that October 2025 deadline for operational status, that maintenance and operations was going to have to go in well in advance of that deadline in order to rehabilitate portions of the building. That was putting a crunch on the emergency cold weather sheltering issues that we are dealing with in upcoming wintertime. And the clarification that that deadline for operational requirement is not 2025, but that the capital costs should be under contract by that point in time, changed the calculus of how they were moving people in and out of the Golden Lion.
So last question. You are our budget and finance director, not our municipal attorney. And so it would be great to have just a statement put out by the municipal attorney at some point that clarifies that this is our general position, and then make sure we all agree.
Through the chair to member Constant, that is pending. And part of the budget process will include a much larger, very robust review of the ML&P sale and the choices that have been made since the sale was finalized and the budget choices moving forward. Municipal manager Wynn Pearson was the negotiating attorney at the time when this deal was made. And so she has front row access to how the conversation went, what the intent of the documents was. And she has reviewed this language and agrees with the interpretation of it, but more than happy to have legal
Yeah,
make
just
that clear.
Put a bow on it.
Absolutely.
you.
All right, other questions? I have one, and I appreciate the walkthrough, and I agree that I think having something more kind of a formal opinion or statement would be helpful. To my knowledge, and correct me if I'm wrong, because this also says, if you read back, it talks about demolition, it talks about being constructed on Muni land and owned by the Muni, operated by someone else. Because I believe originally the discussion was essentially the old Clitheroe Center out in West Anchorage, right? So just again, to be clear, I know since that time, the Golden Lion was purchased and now the focus is on that. So this is now fully disconnected from whatever happens with that building. Is that correct? The building out at Point Warren's off that it was used by, that was the Clitheroe Center. So I was trying to think of what the name was.
To Chair Brawley, unless there is some change of plans or new designation that I am not currently aware of, that's correct.
All right, thank you. So I think we can move on to your next item, next piece.
Number 2, fix Golden Lion prior year operating expenditures with appropriate fund source. This was identified by the previous OMB director as a challenge associated with some of the capital expenditures out of that ML&P set aside fund. There are, I think it's approximately $750,000 that may be in question as to whether or not it can be categorized as a capital cost associated with Golden Lion as opposed to an operating cost, things like utilities, et cetera. Right now, we are working through the audit of those expenditures to determine whether or not they are capital or operating. If they are inappropriately expended from the ML&P capital account, then we will bring a budget adjustment before the body to approve.
And then I'll just briefly note too, so we're at 12:58, we have 12 minutes left. The item on our agenda, Golden Lion budget update, I think is actually part of this. So I just want to spend a couple more minutes on this if we can, and then make sure we have some time for the Project Anchorage item.
Great. The number 3, PERS pension liability, to address Muni's responsibility for remaining PERS liability. The good news is the Assembly took action during the first quarter budget revisions of this year and corrected some of the prior year general government spend that had been allocated and paid out of general government to being paid from the ML&P reserve account. The 2025 mayor's proposed budget will likely include the same fund source for that payment. We are doing a more refined analysis of future PERS liability and what the fund source could be for those payments. And that will be part of the discussion in the 2025 process. The workers' comp, addressing Muni's responsibility for remaining workers' comp liability. Right now, we are working through the questions that are listed here. What are the historical workers' comp claims during MLNP operations? So we are aware of that information. Current status of any claims made from MLNP and the limitation on future claims so that we can monetize that and determine what the potential liability associated with that may be. The other issue that was raised were accounting challenges or other closeout paperwork. One of the really interesting sort of pieces was that during the 2022 ACFR audit, the MOA was notified that the characterization of the balance remaining in the MLNP fund needs to change. We can no longer report it as an enterprise fund because it is not associated with operations of an enterprise. So it needs to be shown on a different page than the enterprise funds. But there is no mandatory account closeout by the year end of 2024. We're still endeavoring to get as many funds and accounts closed out as possible so that the process going forward is cleaner. But the concern was specifically that there was a 2024 hard stop.
Questions on this item? Folks on the phone, please feel free to speak up too if you have any. Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. Looking at those two lines, the workers' comp and the PERS liability, is this something that's going to remain on the books for 50 years, like the police and fire, that pension fund that just, it's continuing to get smaller and smaller, but it continues to remain decade after decade? Is this one of those scenarios?
Through the chair to Member Constant, I don't believe so. There is a time limit on the PERS liability associated. That will be part of the conversation in the budget to figure out exactly what we know that might be at this point in time. The workers' comp liability, we're hoping to encapsulate as part of this compilation of information to say, this is what we think will happen. These are the projections for the dollar amounts associated, but it should not continue on beyond, 50 years and perpetuity.
Right. The issue we've seen with that other one is the fact that, it had some really good years and there was a demand to cash it out to the parties. And then all of a sudden it had a hole and we're filling in money after we paid a bunch of people out and we're getting whole again and people are going to start demanding we pay them out again. And I don't want us to put the future municipality in a boat like that because it's a terrible place to be.
Through the chair to Member Constant, this is being paid through the state PERS program, so it's different than our police, fire, medical retirement, which is a municipality retirement plan.
So maybe less
Responsible.
less up and down as well because it's larger pool. All right, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on this item? Okay, well, thank you for the update. I will also say, just having been here in April and hearing that all of these things needed a lot of attention and they were problems. It's great to see that 5 months later, a lot of them are not problems that, or they're problems that can be solved. So we will, I guess we'll just look in, and OMB, please advise when you want to talk about these items again.
So Chair Brawley, I think we'll talk about them during the budget process for sure. There will be a much larger conversation about MLNP and the Golden Line Association. But I think maybe a quarterly basis right now, if there is something that comes up more frequently than that, we can discuss changing the agenda. But for the time being, I think the concern and timeframe around it is secure.
All right, thank you. Then we will move on to, well, first I'll say, is there anyone in the audience to participate? I see only Muni staff at this point, so not so much. That's true, they could participate. So let's spend our last few minutes on the Project Anchorage implementation timeline, and I'm going to invite Mr. Clauda in the audience to come up as well. And I just want to be clear, this is the AEDC proposed sales tax item that we have had a briefing on last month. We talked about utilizing this committee as a venue for continued discussion of that. We are not going to get into the content or the merits of this item at this time. But what we do want to hear is kind of an initial update or timeline from the administration, because we understand you guys have been doing some work, and just kind of what you want to share at this point as we figure out how we move forward with this process. So go ahead, Mr. Clouda.
I'll actually.
Or wants to start. Yeah,
I'll
go ahead,
actually
Mr. Thurman.
Start, Chair Brawley here. From the Treasury Department, I wanted to give kind of an update, and then I'll go to Nolan more on the administration and some of the other things that he's been working on to lead this project. Right now, the Treasury Department's been diligently working on it with a significant amount of staff. We did have a lot of historical examples to go by, so I know they've been working on that. They anticipate finishing their analysis around October 15th. A lot of the analysis with regards to employees and those kind of things are almost finished or really close to being finished. We're still waiting to get some information back on vendors and systems and those kind of things that go along with that. So around the 15th, we've got a couple of meetings scheduled here to get some internal things over the next week or two, and we'll really start nailing it down. But they're significantly along in the process and are there. Just a couple points, as I always do, just to prime these things. You know, one of the concerns is that they've come up with is, 28, 30 people. Where are we going to find them? Where are we going to put them? How do we train them? How much time is that going to take? Because that's pretty close to what the estimate is. So staffing is a concern. And with any timeline that you speak about or that you do. I think the current July 1st, 26 timeline that's in there is very aggressive and will create almost insurmountable challenges to be able to meet. So that's just kind of a high level kind of idea with regards to that. One of the other areas that could add significant time is, whether we try to do a sole source with our existing software provider to do a module, or whether we're required to put it out for RFP. As you know, that could add 6 months to a time period to be able to implement some those kind of things. So those are just a couple of big items that we're certainly considering, but we expect to have the existing provider information nailed down on cost, on timeline if we were to do that. And then if we're forced to go with an external one, we would most likely just add 6 months onto that timeline to go through an RFP process, contract process, and all of those kind of things. So those are just some major things that would have an impact on the timeline. Certainly from the language just came out, I think yesterday morning. I mean, the initial draft through there's a significant number of language challenges and concerns that I know they're going to bring up as a part of their process. And I'm sure Nolan and the administration will have a variety of other ones, but there's a lot that we're working through. But from a Treasury standpoint, they are significantly far along this process, expected to be finished here around the middle of October with what their needs would be with regards to managing it. I'm sure they will then have some analysis on what they anticipate the impact on the community to be. And then we will have some additional timelines on implementations and expectations on what that would do. So I'll dovetail to Nolan to speak about maybe the non-Treasury things, and then maybe we can come back to.
I have a Treasury question.
All right.
Yeah,
we can
and
start with that.
Before we do that too, just to be clear, all of what you shared is about collection and enforcement, right? So it's really the administration side of the tax.
The
And that's what the
operation,
Treasury
the
is.
operational administering of bringing the money in and accounting for it and those kind of things.
Okay,
yes.
and I want to be clear, just because there's multiple components to this, so we just want to be clear about what we're talking about.
And
Mr.
if-
Council.
before, and it
Yeah.
doesn't count this is not the accountants to do that. It's not the project managers to manage construction projects. And this is the Treasury, just like you would alcohol tax, marijuana tax, they have to, audit and bring in and do that. We're looking at that specific department.
Right. So that is all well past where my questions are. My questions are fundamental and earlier than that. And so you say you've seen the language of the draft?
Right, just what came out and from Dean yesterday. I mean, I've certainly not read it. So, but
Okay,
I can
okay.
tell you the Treasury Department looked through, and when we
I would
met
love
yesterday, they
to
had at
see a
least
copy of that.
a half a dozen challenges already identified. But yeah, I saw it came out, I think, yesterday morning, and Dean had provided some comments, and Jenna from AEDC had provided.
Dean,
Gates.
interesting. Okay.
And I guess I'll share too. So there are 3 assembly sponsors for this. And I think part of the conversation is really figuring out how we move forward from here so
Oh,
that we
yeah.
can have the
Well,
conversation.
I should receive a copy of that document. That's the bottom line. And so if it's out in the public sphere, if members have received it, it should be shared with all members. I'll take care of that though.
I'm just saying, we received it yesterday and
Yeah.
reviewed it.
The question I have, is there any sense of a 5-year average or any kind of a way to mitigate the ups and downs of a sales tax that can come from just market forces?
Yeah, I don't think that we've identified that in Treasury at this point, and that's one of the concerns that with any sales tax is you do have that potential swing, especially since I think there's still what we've been told and what the language might say is it on top of tourism taxes and those kind of things,
Right.
which I think when we read it yesterday, it was slightly maybe different in the language than what we've been led to believe of whether it's included or not included. But those types of things, what that decision, whether it is, does have a big impact, because we have significant flows in our tourism historically
Right.
that would make that. So whether it's in or not is a really important thing. But those are one of the things we flagged between what the initial draft language is and at least what the communications have been in a variety of forms so far that we'd have to match up and come to an agreement on. But yes, they absolutely could have a significant impact on the revenue brought in by these taxes.
That's really the Treasury question that I'm more concerned about than all of the fine details of implementing it. It's how will we manage in a crisis when there's no tourists visiting Alaska and we have a $80 million crash in our tax cap and no way to operate our budget? Nolan?
Yes, through the chair. So that is, I will add that local governments around the U.S., the most common situation is that they have both property and sales tax, and sales tax always has volatility to it. Property taxes are much easier to set at a precise amount and collect that revenue pretty predictably. And so, so what you're doing basically is you're trading off. Property taxes can be relatively stable. You're reducing them, but making them a little bit more volatile because they're going to close the gap left by the sales tax because it's not as precise. So that's the trade-off.
So
Under-
if I
Just
can-
the facts,
If
not
I can interrupt,
defending or
it is
yeah.
1:10. I would ask if we can extend the meeting by 5 minutes. And I think part of what's happening right now is that we need to have these content conversations, and we have not mapped out the place to do that or the process. And so I think that's the ask right now, knowing that there are concerns. And I will say, I know the sponsors, the assembly sponsors have been working on the ordinance. I have not seen it. I've not asked for a copy, but I think that also needs to be part of the conversation. But I think what we need to do today is really hear kind of an initial update. And then I think really what we need to do collectively as the city is work through what our next steps are and also where the public can have part of this conversation.
I just want to say that there's an alternative way to look at what you just said, because we have a tax cap that a lot of communities don't. And so the way that this will affect is it will ratchet down that tax cap. So it won't just be that property taxes will offset the lack of collection that happened under the sales tax. What will happen there is we will have to cut the budget dramatically on any given basis. So 50 cops, everything we would give to the school district, the health department shut down because we had a bad year. We can't just simply shift those expenses to the taxpayer under the property tax rubric. And so because of our tax cap, anyhow, it's not as simple as what other communities do because our equation is slightly different. Thank you.
Move to extend by 5 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Mayor Braga. So I think, so what we'd like to accomplish today is just hear an update. And then I think the next step really that we won't be able to do in the next few minutes is what does this look like going forward? And I think my ask would be to the administration to work with the assembly sponsors to chart that out and to give a really predictable, and just let us know where we can start having these conversations. And this committee can be part of that. But I'll turn to Mr. Clouda for an update.
Just one other aspect of it. I think in addition to the Treasury work, another piece of due diligence that has to be done, and I don't have a timeline for it, but I do want to mention it as an important piece of what we need to do, is that there's the project aspect of it and the capital planning aspect of it too. And this initiative calls for roughly a $300 million capital program, which is a very, very heavy lift. And I think that details about how that planning is conducted, what kind of public process goes along with it, what kind of staff resources are required for it, what kind of budgeting practices go along with that, what kind of accounting for operations and maintenance is included, are questions that we are very concerned with and interested in, but that we do not have answers for yet, but we're committed to finding them.
Mr. Constant?
Yeah, thanks. And my conversations with my community councils has been very interesting because every one of them rages, why don't you ever do anything on our capital improvement program list? You do nothing ever. And so I look forward to seeing if this is 200 plus additional projects on top of the deferred capital improvement plans that we've seen, or if they'll be complementary. Because I see a massive expansion of need and demand coming. So thank you.
Also, Mr. Solt is in the queue, and I know he is one of the assembly sponsors, so go ahead, Mr. Solt.
Thank you, Ms. Brawley. So a couple things to quickly clarify is the AO is not out for public consumption yet. We're working with AEDC and assembly and municipal attorneys trying to get their advice. The draft that is being circulated now, we worked on, provided to Assembly Council probably in June or July. We're just now getting partial edits back, but we need to get it out, move quicker. And on the variable nature of the sales tax and talking with Ms. Browse, one of the ideas that's come up is potentially using actual numbers. So whatever you collected in year one would be implemented in year two. So you would be dealing with an actual figure versus trying to make an estimate. But more to come, and we do plan on having work sessions in the future.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Solt. Any other comments on this?
Yeah, I'll have one. October 1 rolls around and that document isn't public. The barrier for passage becomes so much higher. We told them in June, we needed to see this before October. But if it comes in October, I think the horizon for passage is 2026, if at all. And so, because there's no way we're going to go crashing into this next budget year, taking on something so massive with no time to think about it, but less than a month or two. And so I highly recommend that if there are documents circulating, it's well past time that those documents see the light of day.
Yeah, thanks. And I'll close out because I know we are past our time. I think that is partly why we need to think about this timeline. And so I think we're looking to the administration to outline what you think is realistic, looking to the assembly sponsors to work on getting those things scheduled, knowing that there is some lead time there. And then, yeah, I think there is a small window of feasibility that I think we're trying to figure out. And then also just to say, there should also be on the table a potential special election, knowing there's a cost to that, but just that is also should also be part of the discussion. And so for the budget and finance part, obviously neither of us are sponsors of this item, and so we're not involved in that way. But we are happy to make time on the agenda or extend our meeting time as needed to make room for this. But there probably should be work sessions where all members are present, and so I think that's something that, but well before next meeting, we should figure this out. So let's set a goal of figuring out a timeline by the end of this month. And I see some nods. So with that, I think everybody's ready to move on from this conversation. So let's go ahead and adjourn the meeting. Thank you.